Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Script. I'm your host, Nikki Lynn Mayo, and today we are going to get into the cost of emotional immaturity in motherhood. I came across a social media post, and this is not the first time that I've come across a post like this. And I just really felt like this topic needs to be addressed. It needs to be spoken out about. Somebody has to be thinking of the children, okay? And before I jump in, this isn't necessarily something to shame mothers and women. It's an episode of when you know better, you do better, right? That's how I want you to how I want you to really interpret this. And I will be sharing some of my own personal experiences around this and why these types of discussions, I feel so strongly about. So, one of the things that I have noticed on social media is there are moms who are saying, oh, give custody to the dad. I'm just going to pay child support. I'm going to go live my life. That's one half of it, right? One half is the I'm going to go live my life rhetoric, which is ridiculous. The other half of it is that the dads don't want custody, that the dads are, that if they give custody to the dads, he's going to be running back and being like, I can't take it, like, go ahead and take it, take the baby. That side of it is a little bit different, because I know there are dads out there who don't want custody, who are using the children as leverage, as ways of control, as ways to get back, and different things like that. However, women do that also. Women absolutely do that too, and in my humble opinion, I think they get away with it a little bit more than the men do. So, one of the patterns, let's see, the pattern that nobody wants to name is having children without emotional readiness. Okay. And what this looks like is, I've said this in a post before, like some women will come into motherhood just, completely unexpected, completely unplanned, and without the true desire to be a mom. They had the desire to have a baby. There's a big difference in I want to be a mom and I want to have children versus I want to be a mom and I want to have a baby. Or I'm sorry, versus just I want to have a baby. And so when these babies are born into, to mothers who have unresolved identity crisis, who, really just wanted the, what's the word I'm looking for? Who really just wanted like the idea of the baby, who was, were like, I just, I really want to have a baby. And, it's more like a people pleasing thing, right? Like I want other people to look at me and I want the attention, right? And some women will look at motherhood like that. They will look at it as like, oh, I just wanted to have a baby. But what happens is a baby grows up. You only got a baby for a year. And as the baby grows, then the moms become disconnected. Then the moms have never regulated their own emotions or anything like that. And so now they're lashing out at their children and they're frustrated with their children because their children have opinions and are people and, have things that they like and want to do. And the woman who had the baby didn't necessarily want the lifelong role of parenting, she wanted the baby. So we got to stop doing that. Okay. Babies are not, they're not it's not a Pokemon. You don't go catch them all, right? Like it doesn't work like that. So that's one of the patterns that I see. Taking it back to the other pattern of this idea that we're going to just give away custody and like let dad handle it and this and that. What's actually crazy to me is when or if a man said that, it would be an issue. It would be, oh, he's a deadbeat. He don't want no part of his kid's life. And they be running that man down in the comments, right? But when a woman says it, I notice that praise comes with it. And I think that is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that we are in a society right now where there are certain moms praising the idea of essentially abandoning your children, because that's what it is. At the root of everything, that's what it is, okay? Is that we are going to leave children with daddy and go live our lives. But when dad does it, dad's a deadbeat. And one of the things that I've noticed is it's harder for society to grasp the idea that there are moms that are also deadbeat parents. There are moms who don't want to parent and who do that And either what I'm witnessing is that a lot of them are coming together and cheering each other on, or that people aren't understanding which comments are satire and which comments are legit. And in my personal humble opinion, like that's just not something that should even be joked about to begin with on like a public forum like that. It just doesn't make sense to me, okay? One of the things I told you I'd share a personal story. So some of the things that I have witnessed firsthand when it comes to mothering is, for one, I have witnessed the give custody to dad and I'm going to go live my life. Okay? I am a child of that mentality. So by the time I was a teenager, I was essentially raised by a single father. So being a child of that mentality, when I say nobody is thinking of the children, nobody is actually thinking about the effects it has on the children. Now, there are some instances where yes, some children are better off having an absent parent. I fully get that. But in the instances where it's pure selfishness and it's just, I didn't really want to be a mom anymore, or whatever it is, right? Like, again, who is thinking of the children? These are the same women who wanted a baby, but they did not want the role of parenting. They didn't want the responsibility of being a parent. They wanted the prize. They wanted the mom title to have the prize and to have the attention and, different things like that. But then they actually didn't want to follow through into motherhood. They didn't want to adapt the responsibilities of motherhood. So when they're tired of being a mom, they brush the kids off. And I remember being a teenager and being jealous of like mother daughter relationships. I do remember that. I do remember, like, as much of a shield as I put up, there was still a lot of jealousy around, like, that's not fair. Like, her and her mom are going prom dress shopping. Her and her mom are doing this, doing that. Like, that was just something that I didn't have. My sister and I didn't have that, not in high school. Okay. And so when I see these comments of people, like, saying things like that, I'm like, you're not, there's no emotional intelligence there, because you're really not thinking of the children, right? That's one half of it. The other half that falls under the same category in the reverse, and I've also been experienced of this, is the women who use their children to try to control the other parent. And when I say that, I'm not saying that men can't do this. I touched on that earlier. Like, yes, some men do this, but I'm speaking about the moms right now. The moms who use the children to try to control the other parent, and as like a pawn and a fear tactic, right? And so these are the moms that are like, well, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to move away with your child and you're not going to see your child anymore. Or, try to use custody as a punishment, right? Or try to use um this idea that, like, I'm the mother and the child is all I need, as a way to get back at the dad. All that is that is putting adult emotions and experiences on the child, right? Because at the end of the day, children, they don't care which parent messed up. And it's crazy how humans are wired, because humans are wired to want and crave the love of a parent. And so if a child has no contact with you, for example, that is 100% on the parent, because children are just not wired like that. We're not wired to want to go no contact with our parents. But anywho, back to personal story. So same thing. When I was smaller, I was a child of a parent who had that mentality too. Like, well, if this doesn't work, and you don't do XYZ, like, I'm just gonna take the kids and go. I'm just going to take the kids and leave. It was always like, it was always the threat tactic, the fear tactic of like, well, I'm just going to take the kids. Now, the irony is the same person who wants to take the kids eventually is the one who also doesn't want anything to do with them. So when it comes to that, the lack of emotional intelligence is the children were never actually seen as children, as people. They were always seen as either a burden or a means for control. They were always seen as something that you can get something out of. And the problem with that type of thinking is you can't get something out of your children forever if you're in it to try to get something out of them, right? It doesn't work like that. And so the problem with that type of thinking is, once you stop getting what you could get from your children, then you toss them aside. Now, what some people end up doing is then they go and they make more children. They go and they have more children to try to get something out of them. And there's like a phrase for this. I forget what it was. Somebody like I heard something on the internet that was like these are the types of moms that like want like a keychain from, each person that they're with, and the keychain is actually children and things like that. But anywho, I digress on that. The bigger thing is the moms don't want to be moms. And what do you do when moms don't want to be moms and dads don't want to be dads? Then you have children that are raising themselves. You have children that are figuring out how to do everything for themselves. You have children that grow up people pleasing because, like I just said, the nature of humans is to want your parents' approval. And when you're in a state of trying to gain the approval of somebody that you cannot, that doesn't have the capacity to give it to you, you are you're in a constant state of people pleasing. And then this ends up showing up in adulthood. And so this is really the root of everything, is when there is no emotional intelligence within the mom, and we're sitting here and we're joking about giving the child up and giving out custody, and I'm just going to give the child to dad, or using the child as a means to get back at your ex or whatever it is. Nobody is actually thinking about how this affects the child internally. One of the most common things I will hear people say is, well, my child turned out fine. What does that mean? What does that mean, turned out fine? Because they went and they got a good job and a degree, and you know what I mean? They're a productive member of society. Of course, we all want to be productive members of society. However, there's a whole emotional layer and a whole subconscious layer and a whole upbringing that is not being recognized, because the adults in the room do not have the emotional intelligence to do so. The adults in the room do not have the emotional intelligence to understand that one day these children are going to be the adults in the room. And the reason they don't have this emotional intelligence is because the adults in the room haven't done any type of self-work, inner work for themselves. Because if they had, they wouldn't be running around the internet making these comments. That's the first sign to me. I'm like, you guys are you're sitting here talking about giving your children away. That tells me everything I need to know about where you are on an emotional intelligence level, the type of inner work you've done, all of that. Because there is none being done. And so when there is none being done, you pass on that same level to your children, and then your children have to do some type of inner work, right? But they're going to have to learn it from somewhere else. And so there's a whole disconnect in adults recognizing the impact that their choices have on children. And aside from that, then there's the pride factor. There's the part where eventually, maybe, the adult, the mom, does some inner work later. Maybe you had kids young, you do the inner work later, right? And you realize, dang, I did kind of mess things up. Now, obviously, there's a role of guilt that comes to play, because you can't go back in time and change it. You know what I mean? Like that layer is already completed. There's no going back and doing it different. You just get one shot when you have your kids, which is why it's crazy to me that y'all are joking about giving up custody, but that's another topic. Well, that's this topic, but that's another portion of the topic. But you recognize that you only get one chance at raising your kids, right? You only get one chance at doing right by them when they're this age and this age, when they're 5, when they're 6, when they're 4, when they're 2, when they're 10, right? Because they're never going to be that age again. And so then there's the pride, guilt, and shame factor that comes with this realization. First, you do some inner work and you're like, man, I actually shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have given up so easily on my children. Or, I shouldn't have used my children as a means to get back at my ex. Or, whatever it is, right? Then you have this realization, but simultaneously, the next level of that realization is, I can't go back and change it. I can't change a single thing about what I did, right? So then you have the guilt factor. So now you're guilty for it, maybe some shame around it, depending on how deep your healing went. And now it's either, what do you do? Do you apologize and say that, you messed up? That takes a lot of pride. Or I'm sorry, that takes a lot of guts. Or Do you get defensive? Are you like, well, I did the best I could and that's all I could do, and whatever, right? Like I can't go, I can't fix the past, like we just have to move on. Being Having access to a dismissive parent like that, again, does some damage. Okay, it does damage to the child's inner self of, well, maybe my feelings don't matter. You see what I mean? There's a lot of different layers to unpack here when a mom lacks emotional intelligence. Because the lack of emotional intelligence, if there's a lack of having difficult conversations, the child begins to feel that their feelings do not matter. When we are, you know, unable to praise our children or unable to connect with our children because we're looking at them as like, well, what can I get out of this? Then the child develops people pleasing. When we either give up our rights to our child or give up time with our child, or we take time away from the other parent who wants to be involved, then you have the issue of abandonment, right? You have the issue of questioning, depending on what's being told. This isn't the case for every single scenario, but depending on what the child is being fed, then you have the issue of wondering like, well, why wasn't I good enough for XYZ parent, right? Especially if the parent just leaves. There's a little bit more of a reparation that can come if, you know, eventually like the child understands circumstances or whatever and realizes that neither parent left. But when a parent leaves, there's a different layer there. So anywho, I'll leave this episode with this. If you are a mother, it is your responsibility, earthside and through the divine, to care for your children. Okay? Fathers too, but I'm speaking to moms this episode. It is your responsibility to do that. If you had children before you were ready, it is your responsibility to figure out how to get ready. If you had children before you had the emotional maturity and capacity to do so, you need to figure out how to get emotionally mature. And you're going to also have to own up in the moments where you are emotionally immature. Okay? We need to stop having these celebration of abandonment of our kids on social media. We need to stop having this double standard in language and thinking, oh, because some of the men are out here being deadbeats, we can do it too. No, we need to stop doing that because it's not cute. It's not funny. It's not quirky. You know what I mean? And it's a difference. There's a difference between like having a quick joke with a friend of yours who you know for damn well is not going to like actually do it, right? There's a difference in like that layer of joke versus actually like making a plan around it, actually like making these comments of like, no, I am going to do this and stuff like that, right? Like we need to stop with the double standard of language and we need to hold everybody accountable to what they have created. Okay, if you want to raise a solid generation, you have to take responsibility for yourself and for your children because your children are an extension of yourself. So you have to take responsibility for all of that. And it's just, at this point, it's just time to grow up emotionally. It's time to recognize children as people and not as pawns or things without feeling. Okay, thinking that children don't have feeling is such archaic way of thinking. This is like when my grandma was a child. We are past that. We are long past that. So, with that being said, this episode was a little bit different, but if you resonate with anything that I said, drop a comment. Let me know. Let me know if anything stood out. Got a little bit rambly in there. But, as a mom of three, a stepmom of one, and a daughter of a mother who lacks emotional intelligence, I know a thing or two. I know a thing or two about a thing or two. So, anywho, that was this week's episode of Beyond the Script. We will be back. I will be back next week on Tuesday. I don't know what the topic is yet, but everybody have a wonderful, happy new year. Let's leave this grossness of celebrating abandonment in 2025. I don't want to see it next year. And, I just want to remind you, like, this episode is not for outrage or anything like that. It is if you care for children and you are really wanting to do better for the children, then this is the one for you. Anyways, have a blessed day, you all. Bye bye.